I'm David Nour of Relationship Economics, and this is Connecting the Dots. This episode, need an excuse? Use the perfect storm. Have you noticed the recent trend of business executives trying to explain their company's sudden, utter failure resort to the perfect storm metaphor? Give me a break. It's amazing to think how many people actually buy into this nonsense. Isn't it interesting that what a ship went through in an extremely rare and unusual collision of three weather systems has become an excuse for poor judgment, lousy leadership, and abuse of the facts? Not to mention a complete disregard for the most valuable asset, what we call your portfolio of relationships, the executive's reputation capital, and certainly the organization's professional net worth. Either these executives think we're all idiots, or their sheer opportunistic and manipulative tactics have drowned their sense of objectivity. Let's look at some recent examples. Sam Zell made his fortune in commercial real estate. Just as circulation and advertising revenues began to decline, he decides to buy the Tribune Company, a portfolio of newspapers and broadcasters. How about the Detroit auto executives in Washington, trying to convince the purse strings on the Hill that the only reason they're in deep trouble is because people have stopped buying their cars? The boys in the Middle East are making a mint on gas prices. There's, of course, a massive credit crunch, and everyone is losing their jobs. It's useful to remember that in the gripping account of a shipwreck that popularized the notion of the perfect storm, the skipper of the Andrea Gale received urgent and repeated warnings that he was headed into what could be a monster storm, warning that the captain and his crew chose to ignore. If they had listened, the Andrea Gale would have never left port. It's no different from many of the executives who used the perfect storm excuse. When Sam Zell was negotiating for Tribune, there was widespread consensus that the internet was stealing readers and advertisers from the mainstream media, eating away at profit margins, and calling into question the industry's antiquated business model. The CEO's ego, arrogance, and often utter ineptitude, along with a total disregard for the financial well-being of countless stakeholders, has often led to the perfect storm many companies find themselves in. I suppose we can have a bit more sympathy for the auto manufacturers who might not have understood that the reason Americans were buying record number of foreign vehicles in recent years had nothing to do with the cheap credit or mortgage cash outs and everything to do with the superior styling and quality of the products. But are we really supposed to believe that when giant century-old companies hit a sudden downturn in sales, the reason they run out of cash in a matter of months has nothing to do with the billions upon billions of dollars they spend on reckless promises of job security and lavish health benefits for workers and retirees? What has capsized our current economy is not a perfect storm, but a widespread failure of business leadership, a failure that is only compounded when executives refuse to take responsibility for their misjudgments. While my comments may seem way too broad and too harsh, isn't foresight and corrective action what leadership is really all about? Isn't candor and forthright what leadership is really all about? Leadership certainly rarely involves using excuses. So what should you do the next time you're faced with an unparalleled test of your character, integrity, and leadership in a certain phase of a crisis? For starters, stand up for what you believe with conviction and make your voice heard at high-profile industry conferences, amongst your various stakeholders, and with credible sources of industry news, with facts and compelling anecdotes to illustrate the underlying and fundamental industry challenges, how the greed for personal gain may lead to long-term turbulence and instability in the company or overall market. Imagine if any of the top Wall Street executives had done that in early 2006, when the credit mania was in full swing. Sure, they would have infuriated almost all of their peers, embarrassed and annoyed the regulators who like people to think that they have everything under control, lose market cap as industry analysts rush to issue sell recommendations, all to the delight of journalists. With regulators looking into these worrisome comments and with appropriate level of foresight, it would have helped the system begin to correct itself, with the biggest benefit going to the company that first broke from the pack. Naive? I don't think so. The fact that we now all shake our heads and say, what were they thinking? When we hear of all those all-leveraged corporate buyouts or subprime mortgages made without income verification, that it wouldn't have taken much to bring the world to its senses. On Wall Street, however, there were no leaders willing to end this self-delusion and call the credit bubble for what it really was. Rather than tell the truth and have faith in people to do the right thing, they cynically played along in a dangerous game that eventually cost employees their jobs, investors their savings, and customers their financing. It shouldn't hardly be a surprise that those employees, investors, and customers are now eager to return the favor. My name is Nour with Relationship Economics, and this has been another episode of Connecting the Dots.